Picture this. You're back to the year of 2009. The big three of Naruto, Bleach, and One Piece are still airing episodes weekly. Wait. That doesn't work. That's still happening. How do I make this better? Hetalia Axis Powers was still a thing that was still looked at friendly, and the Winter 2009 season has just finished airing, meaning that spring season is on the horizon. With it comes the arrival of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, a new anime adaptation of FMA which is set to follow the manga's plot one-to-one, unlike 2003's diversion of the plot, going on to become one of the more popular animes of its era, and even today, with some controversy keeping it in place. In and of the East would debut that same season as well, which not only keeps the nomination block going from strength to strength, and would win the Best TV Series of 2009 at the Animation Curve Awards that same year, but also gives another huge showcasing of Production IG's talents once again. Dragon Ball Kai debuts as well, showing off a new generation of anime viewers a more condensed version of the legendary anime, which would lead into its resurgence of its popularity into the 2010s. And the re-airing of the Melancholia Power Suzumiya finally gets around to the main event of its airing, as the second season and proper new content for Kyoto Animation's biggest success of the time is finally starting to present its viewers with new adaptations. And one of which goes on for far too long. But with Kyoto Animation specifically, this wasn't their only big thing for this season, as they had just finished up the sequel season to their most successful key adaptation in Clannad Afterstory. And after such a big success, albeit one that broke the hearts of many viewers, many felt it was time for them to return to their roots, in a sense. So, on April 3rd, 2009, Kyoto Animation debuted their main new anime of the season, as they followed up their big success in Clannad Afterstory with a series that returned to the light-hearted shenanigans that made them famous to begin with, but with a little added something sweeter into the mix. This series was K-On!, a slice-of-life comedy series which focused on a quartet, later quintet, of various levels of musical talent at an all-girls school coming together to save a dying school club, the Light Music Club. What follows is 2 seasons, 40 episodes and 1 movie in total, of hijinks, bangers, and emotionally driven moments between them and their extended cast of characters, which will turn what would have been any other series of the time into a catalyst for how anime would be changed moving forward, as K-On! Would not only give new life of the genre into which it was created to appeal to, but bring in a new subgenre of moe into it, which would effectively lead to many animes after it to essentially copy. Not only that, but it would also give a resurgence to the slowly dying music genre of anime, which had been dwindling in recent years following along from a few heavy hitters becoming forgotten in the face of a rising tide of bigger animes in the market. And with those 2 factors, K-On! Would not only become a titan of the next 2 years of anime, but would effectively become one of Kyoto Animation's biggest success stories, and arguably a poster child of the anime studio's history going forward. I've already talked heavily about this series and my personal history with it in my previous video, which you can check out on this channel. But today, I'm going to be talking about the broader appeal of K-On!, its overall impact, why it works the way it does, and hopefully explain why I love K-On! And why you should too. But in order to talk about K-On! In general, we need to talk about the origins, specifically looking at the creator of its manga, as well as the studio of which will go on to create the anime that's remembered for today. Kakaflea and Kyoto Animation. So when talking about the manga, it's admittedly a very basic topic to cover, as, shockingly, the manga that the anime was based on wasn't your typical manga format that you'd be used to, as it was released as a 4-panel or 4-koma format. And while that isn't exactly a bad thing, mind you, or even necessarily a mark against the series' quality in and of itself, it's something to keep in mind because Kakaflea released this as his main series between 2007 to 2010. Not exactly the biggest years for something of this nature. All aside, K-On! Being a 4-koma manga wasn't exactly a blockade for many people, as when it was published in Manga Time Kiara between those 4 years, it managed a steady enough base to keep it going, only matched by its sales figures when it was released in Tankobon volumes in 2008. As when it started being released in those volume formats, they were actually found to be a modest success amongst the public, as it was reported between 2008 and 2010 that each volume, when it was released, on the release days, that would often get to be around the 30th highest selling mangas on those dates. And that's to say nothing of the amount they sold per volume on average, as it would later average out to about 30k in each volume released. Pretty good success for something of which was an exception in the market, and not exactly the rule. To compare it to other series that came before it from the same cloth, Lucky Star had reportedly gotten 1.8 copies sold after 5 years of publishing in the volume formats by 2008, so while K-On! Wasn't as big of a success story as it was by that time, it was still big for its time. The manga itself covers the basis of what we're going to get into with the anime, and surprisingly there isn't much deviation from the source material, much from what could be seen in its pages compared to the anime, which admittedly can be expected of a series limited by its choice of medium. However, like most 4-koma personally, the pacing can be pretty hit or miss, so while I do definitely suggest giving it a look at some point, I consider the K-On! Anime to be the definitive experience for this series. In terms of the main 4 volumes of the series itself, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But speaking of the K-On! Anime, there's one aspect that we have yet to cover in the lead up to talking about the anime itself. The company that spun the wheels into getting it into action to begin with. Kyoto Animation. So I don't think we really need to cover the history of Kyoto Animation as much as we needed to cover the manga's creation. But for the sake of posterity and also being fair about it, let's go over some key bits of their history. Originally founded in 1985 by Yoko and Hideaki Hara, Kyoto Animation mainly did smaller production such as 1991's What is Happiness, which was apparently made for the happy science cult in Japan, Curse Dress in 1992 alongside Shin A Animation, and Nurse Witch Komugi in 2002. That was until 2003, when they were tasked with taking the reins of Fullmetal Panic from Studio Gonzo, starting with the spin-off from Mofu in 2003, and later full-blown making the second season of it with the second raid in 2005, before they powered it back over to Studio Zevik in 2018 for Invisible Victory 13 years later. This, however, was the first domino in a series of events which would lead Kyoto Animation to be the animation department for Key's first visual novel anime adaptation, Air, in 2005. I said Key's first visual novel anime adaptation! And from there, all hell would break loose. The next year after Air and second raid, Kyoto Animation would be tasked with covering the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya's anime adaptation, opening the floodgates of success to follow as they would cover Key's canon the same year. Following along from that, in 2007, they'd adapt the 4-koma manga Lucky Star into the anime we all know today as the series intro that gave us the visual for the out-of-touch Thursday meme. But real ones will recognize it as being the anime where the first 10 minutes of its first episode is a discussion on what way to eat a certain sweet treat. Oh, and being a perk at otaku culture at the time. This would also be the same year that Clannad would begin its run, leading into 2008 where Clannad After Story would air that same year, leading us up to the present of 2009 with K-On!'s debut lingering in the horizon. But I want to stop there before we dive into the real meat and potatoes of today's topic, as we've yet to discuss the duo that gave us this series in its animated form, the team of director Naoko Yamada and writer Reiko Yoshida. Now, contrary to what people may think, Naoko Yamada didn't actually start directing with K-On! In fact, her first works prior to this were directing several episodes of Clannad and Clannad After Story. Of merit to speak on, she was the director For White Darkness and After Story, one of the most soul-crushing episodes to sit through the series. In contrast, however, she was also director of the same season's finale as well. Make of that what you will. So while Yamada had gotten some success in directing prior to this series, this is actually a very big thing because she was given the head director spot for the series, and I'd argue her work on Clannad only cinched it for her. Comparatively, Reiko Yoshida prior to working on K-On! Has had a lot of experience in scriptwriting for anime, with her earliest works dating all the way back to the 70s, and some highlights of her career being all 4 of the adventure-era Digimon movies, School Rumble, Genshiken, Aria, and D-Greyman, just to name a few. Which is to say that the combination of Yamada's newness to being a director for anime, alongside Yoshida's long, expansive list of experience, would make a perfect blend of a duo heading up such a series like this. And with a director and writer who had both had experience with light and fluffy anime, as well as some really bittersweet ones, it only makes sense how this ended up the way it did. But without giving the game away too much, how did K-On! End up becoming the monolith it was for its time when it debuted in 2009? Well, let's find out, shall we? So our story begins at the start of a new year for second year Yui Hirasawa, who is basically implied to have gone through most of her school life until now, not really having that much of a life after the fact, much to the charge of her one lone friend at school, Nodoka, who effectively worries for her to becoming a NEET. As a result, Yui feels a bit pressured into joining a school club in order to find something she'd be interested in after school has completed for her. Cue major anxiety from Yui having to make such a big decision so suddenly in her life. A much too relatable feeling for any high schooler in her predicament. Meanwhile, other members of her school and childhood besties, Mio Akiyama and Ritsu Tainaka, are trying to revive a school club in which all of its members have graduated, the Light Music Club. Well, I say they're both trying, but it's mainly Ritsu's idea really, as Mio is basically adamantly wanting to join any other club instead. But Ritsu is determined to make a dream the two of them have seemingly made together to make a band and play the Budokan together happen through reviving the club. Much to Mio's grumbling. But they're not the only ones who are wanting to revive the club, as Tsumugi Hotobuki is interested. As a genuine piano player, she is wanting to ensure the club doesn't dissolve. However, there's still one member short, and needing 4 to ensure the club can remain alive, hoping anyone will join. Yui seeing a flyer advertising the club and feeling interested, but pressured into joining, and you think we have a premise going. Except, Yui kind of doesn't understand what she's signing up for is... Well, I think it will work best if I let her explain it herself.
I can play castanets. Quick.
Yeah, if you didn't guess it already, our main girl is kind of an airhead at the best of times, and... well, we'll come to that in due time. Main point here is, Yui didn't realize she was signing herself up for a proper music club that plays instruments like guitars, drums, and piano, and not more simpler instruments. And as a result, she feels overwhelmed by the idea and considers quitting. However, not easily deterred, the rest of the members put on a quick performance to dissuade Yui into doing so, and even convince her to join properly, with Yui only replying back when asked of their performance.
You guys aren't very good, are you? Talk about blunt.
But it was worth enough to convince her in order to join the club, saving it from dissolution as well as getting our first main quartet into place. And so, our series premise is put into place. Yui doesn't know much about music but is willing to learn guitar in order to fit in. Mio is our straight woman but bass player trying to keep everyone in line how she can and keep them on track. Ritsu is the ADHD-coded but passionate club head drummer who is constantly bonked when stepping out of line too much. And Tsumugi is the Hirajoshi piano-playing rich girl who proceeds to provide the club with sweets and tea every time they meet up, and uses her status to their advantage, while also romanticizing common folk life every chance she gets. Or to put it in a way that makes sense to appeal to the older anime fans watching this, let me break down the characters a bit easier with a handy-dandy character chart comparing them to other characters in this medium and breaking down their characters' arcs just a little bit easier. For the sake of brevity, the characters we'll be comparing them to go in this order: Lucky Star, Ichigo Bashibearer, Hidabari Sketch, Azumanga Daioh, Clannad, And finally, K-On! At the very end for their character archetype for this series, which are the basic 5 examples which can be compared to these archetypes, as they were the most common during the era that K-On! Came out in. That being said, you could probably add more examples in from more modern anime of the time, like Nichijou and Kaguya-sama, but if I listed off every modern example on here, then my brain would explode and this video would never see the light of day. So let's start off with Ritsu down here, who is the bokeh, or funny man, who's more or less there to be the joker of the group and generally cause chaos. Your examples in the same camp are Kurnata, Miyu, Miyako, Tobo, and Fuko. Then, to pair them off, you have your Tsukuyomi by comparison, which here is Mio, essentially the aforementioned straight man who is there to play off their rowdy and more chaotic behavior for their more refined version, and try to keep them in line through violence. Other examples here are Kagami, Chika, Sai, Yomi, and Kyo. These two actually work best out of the group as they're formed in a style of comedy in Japan known as manzai, which dates as far back as the Edo period in Japan and is mostly popular in the Osaka region in more recent times, which arguably means that this kind of humor is as timeless as you can get with comedy duos in Japan. But without getting too ahead of myself here and deviating any further, we still have 2 archetypes to look at in comparison here. Next is Best Girl Yui in the moe through helplessness archetype, which is usually associated with characters who find themselves often in situations where they are anxiety-riddled messes who will get flustered over any small inconvenience and will need the assistance of others to escape from. Or they are just neurodivergent disasters. For examples here, see Tsukasa, Matsuri, Yudo, Osaka, and Nagisa. And finally, we have Tsurugi in the seemingly perfect at first glance, usually slotted in for characters who either come from more well-off families or have a higher reputation in schooling, like being on the student council for instance, but often harbor imperfections about themselves or their personal lives, which is either used for character growth or humor. Mainly the latter, though. Your examples here are Miyuki, Anna, Hiro, Chio, and Tomoyo. And there you have it. A semi-abbreviated, possibly not even necessary look into the character archetypes of slice of life anime compiled into one handy-dandy comparison for today's topic. Wait, what was I talking about again before this? Oh, yeah, right, our main 4 is dynamic together. So yeah, this is basically it for them, and with all that chaos put together, they make up a group that could very well make it to the Budokan one day. If they practiced hard enough to be able to get that good anyhow. Yeah, as it turns out, when you throw together a group as jumbled up as these 4 are, you're bound to get the typical shenanigans that come with the territory. And the first 3 episodes of the series make it clear as day that while the series does have a bit of a heart to it, that it's very much what you would expect for the genre. Unsurprisingly, one of the things that turns some people off this show is how it leads in with the premise of this all-girl group coming together to make a makeshift club music band, and make it big, similar to anime that came before it like Nana or Beck before its time. And how that basically becomes what many people feel is secondary to the cutesy moeblob antics. But given that this series could essentially be at least partly responsible for the rise of the moeblob medium becoming more popular as a result of this kind of series success, it needs to be said that while branding it as patient zero for this kind of boom period isn't wrong, it is a bit unfair to try and punch down on this series because of it. And as someone who used to be guilty of making those complaints myself when I watched it when I was younger, I'll say this. If you go into a series like this expecting that when the publisher of its source material gave us stuff like Yu Yu Shiki as well, you're barking up the wrong tree if you think this is all that it is. Because yes, the series does have the task of properly following the group along as they try to make the club and the band they're making it with work. You also gotta remember that, like any high school slice of life anime, you gotta have some level of balance in the mix in order to get it to work properly. The antics within the first 3 to 4 episodes are a perfect showcasing of this, as, while they do lean into the aspects of the drama which many know by now, and the archetypes that we've already talked about by this point, it does manage to have it focus semi-regularly on the reason why they are all put together. For example, in the second episode, it follows up directly with the major conflict of Yui joining and being the lone person in the group who can't play any instrument, so they offer the teacher how to play guitar. But the additional problem is that Yui doesn't have a guitar, and is consistently broke and unable to buy one of her own. So the main thing that causes the shenanigans of them doing odd jobs to try and help Yui afford the guitar she wants leans into the aspect of the music side of things, while making it clear it will use said aspects to lean in hard and make the shenanigans work in their favor. And to their credit, it works surprisingly well. Hell, the entire resolution to the plot is that Mugi just uses her family's rich connections to the music store to haggle the price down so Yui can afford it, effectively making their previous effort seem small when Mugi can just make it happen so easily. But hey, we got there in the end. In episode's 3 plot, whose main conflict surrounds Yui being unable to obtain good grades due to being distracted while studying affects her ability to perform in club activities, while she's awaiting a makeup test for her dismal mark in the initial test of it. And despite her efforts to try and keep herself focused, she ends up getting to the day prior to the test and having not gotten much studying done, and instead getting distracted or practicing guitar instead, leading to the other 3 to arrange a cram session for her. This, by extension, introduces the other 3, as well as the viewers fully, to the younger sister of Yui, Ui Hirasawa, who pretty much is the more responsible of the two, playing into a dynamic not seen often in anime wherein Ui is basically a replacement for their parents who aren't around as often. And once they are introduced to Ui as the mature younger sister trope, they are initially shocked, as they expected Ui to, well, basically be a mini Yui in their heads. What follows is your typical cram session for the latter half of this episode, with Ritsu being the lone member of the team who seems to not be doing anything helpful and getting bonked on the head for her troubles. Multiple times even. You could make a drinking game out of how many times she gets bonked. I can't promise you'll have a functioning liver by the end of it, but it's certainly a good way to pass the time with this show. This is tea. Of course, Yui ends up passing her test and gets pretty good grades out of it, almost shockingly getting the complete opposite score of the one she initially got, showing a big character moment for her here where she's basically either really good at something she puts her focus into, or she's absolutely the worst at it. Established by the fact that after all that cramming,
I forget how. So you're back to square one?
this leading to the 4th episode of the series, wherein realizing that they haven't been doing much practicing, they arrange a training camp over the upcoming break at one of Mugi's vacation houses. Yes, I say one of them. Mugi is a rich girl after all, so they gotta make sure they tell you that how flippant she is about these facts. Anyhow, as you expect, not much practice comes from this and they end up goofing off for the majority of their time in this episode, culminating in them only getting a few days worth of the 3 days that they were actually there to be practicing in, and the rest is dedicated to...
Eat this! It just grew to this size before I knew it. The adorable power of cute compels you! Love! Sparkly!
So yeah, if you expected the series to be fully embracing the fact that they're going to make it as a band and take things seriously, this may or may not be your cup of tea, in a sense, because it does not go the way you think it will. However, it needs to be said that it arguably works very well in spite of that criticism surrounding it. And if you go into it less expecting something like Nana or Beck, and more the likes of Azumanga and Lucky Star before it, you may come to find something to enjoy from it, given the fact this series does have some very good moments hidden within its goofy moments past these initial 4 episodes. In fact, given how serious and down-tempo some episodes can be in the later stages of both seasons, it could be argued that these are still just as important and very well prominent in order to balance out the tone over time, as to not have the audience suffer a sudden whiplash along the way. But I'd also argue that if you can make it past those initial 4 episodes and into the rest of the series, you may be rewarded for your efforts of dealing with this series being very comical about its premise, by having some genuinely amazing takes on the music genre applied to it for the rest of the series' run. For as much as K-on's roots focus mainly on the heart of it being a slice-of-life comedy series, and it revels in it a lot throughout its series run at the time, it needs to be said that K-on also very much knows when to get serious and understand that at some point, it does have to showcase some of its musical aspects in it. And starting with episode 5, it very much begins to tell the audience that it knows what they want, and are very willing to show that yes, they can in fact do some damn music in this anime about music. Episode 5 gives us the debut of one additional character to the cast, Sawako-sensei, who in a convoluted series of events which threatened to stop the band from playing at an upcoming school festival due to Ritsu not filling in the form application on time, they need a club supervisor. And so enters Sawako-sensei, who's found to have been a member of the light music club in the past, and proceeds to chastise the current members of the club for not using the room correctly and slacking off. However, she's cooled off by being offered some sweets. Sawako's first appearance as a fully fledged character is amazing as a result, because she first comes in with you thinking she's going to be strictly become someone of which will mentor the group into actually being decent players and a proper band given her background and pedigree. Especially given the fact that she actually was in a band after high school as part of her background. Granted, it's used for comedic value as well. But you quickly realize that she is the group's Miss Yukari or Nobue, the person who is meant to keep the 4-person troupe in line and lead them to where they need to be, but ends up falling into their shenanigans as well, as Sawako quickly becomes an enabler for them to wear cute outfits and the shenanigans surrounding this idea. And I'd be lying if it wasn't fucking great, but that's not all of what makes Sawako relevant to this section. Because before Sawako becomes too enamored by the allure of putting her high school students into various degrees of outfits for her own leisure, she ends up gifting one of them her own skills that she learned from her time as a guitarist and vocalist, that being Yui. And what happens is an insanely amazing moment which can make or break people who wish to keep on going with this. As after 24 hours, Yui comes back dramatically, the shading even reflecting it as a more serious event, and then this happens. Yui has somehow managed to increase her ability to play overnight, and it stuns everyone involved, to the point that they even think she can pull off doing vocals as well. Until Yui starts to sing and her voice is hoarse, Sawako having pushed her way too far, way too soon, and now they need to sort out who is going to sing their debut song, eventually deciding that Miura will be the one to do it. Which, speaking of that debut song, we finally get to hear them play some original music, complete with vocals come episode 6. And the moment you hear the first chords hit, you know it's gonna be some heat. So let's finally talk about the music of K-On! I've been holding off talking about it until this moment, but it's well and truly here where I feel, for all the memes this gave us and the jokes and everything else that may seem contentious about this series, the music is where this series shines the most. And there is no bigger, shining example of that with the song that you're currently, hopefully anyway, listening to in the background. Fwa Time. Or Light and Fluffy Time as its literal translation. Because hidden within its slamming guitar sounds, its hard drumming, and those riffs are lyrics that are so fucking mushy and lovey-dovey you'd be mistaken for thinking this were joke lyrics. And trust me, Sawako immediately thinks of them as such when she reads them off in episode 5. But with how catchy the lyrics are, mixed in with the amazing instrumental and the harmonies between Yui and Miura's voice actors, it's an amazing first listen to the incidental music of this series, which absolutely goes from strength to strength. We'll focus more on how amazing they are when we get to Season 2, as Fwa Time is the lone insert song that plays in Season 1. But while we're on this train talking about the music of K-On!, how about them opening and ending theme songs? You've probably heard the opening theme song Kagayake Girls at least twice by now if you've watched both this and my last video on K-On!. And you would know by now how amazing it is of an opening theme song, as it's performed by the voice actors in the series as well, with mainly Yui at the front of it. Like most of what you come to expect by now, it plays into the more sweeter style of K-On!'s overall theme, while also being an amazingly hard song as well. By comparison, we have Don't Say Lazy as our ending theme, which leads fully into the traditional hard rock style that you'd think they'd be into if they made it big. To the point I headcanon the ending songs as the one they make when they go pro after high school. This one, like all the endings, are sung by Mio in comparison to Yui taking the reins for the openings, which fits a more serious demeanor this far into the series and comparatively to the rest of them moving forward after this. And while the series itself would not garner the Best Television award at the same award show, Don't Say Lazy won Best Theme at the 14th Animation Kobe Awards in 2010, putting it alongside the likes of We Are from One Piece, Hair Yukai from Haruhi, Moetake Sailor Fuku from Lucky Star, Gurin no Yamiya from Attack on Titan, Stardust Crusader's second opening, and the opening to Squid Girl? God, the Animation Kobe Awards are weird sometimes. Point is, if there was any sign at this point that the music coming out of this music slice of life anime was to be amazing, then this was it in my honest opinion. Especially given that when the maxi single for Fuwa Time came out, it was a big enough hit to properly chart on the Oricon music charts at the time of its release. But we'll talk about the sales of K-on's merch in due time. Trust me, there is a lot of ground to cover in that department. But episode 6 does mark a pretty big moment for the first season of K-on, as it's the moment where arguably the series begins to hit its stride in terms of what it wants to do. And that's be an indulgent Moeblobs slice of life series, while also giving its audience some music that absolutely slaps alongside it as well, with there being no greater example of this than them absolutely killing their performance together as a group. And then Mio trips over exposing her underwear to the audience. Cute moe moe cute. However, moving forward on from that, minus a break in the between for a Christmas episode, which is a prerequisite for these series, the series then takes another approach into making a more serious attempt at leading into the aspect of them trying to take things more seriously. And this comes to effect with the 5th addition to their group, first year Azusa Nakano, who lured the club through their performance at a showcase event for clubs. Despite having a less than stellar start to marketing their group, Azusa's interest in the club wins out over the weird marketing strategy they pull out, much to their joy. However, it's clear from Azusa's first episode as a member of the club that compared to the rest of them, she's way more serious about music than they seem to be, as her family comes from a jazz background and was expecting them to be full on as their performances usually are, leading to a big conflict which focuses heavily on the fact that the four don't really take the club time that seriously and end up grouping off most of the time, leading to her frustrations and eventually considering quitting the club as she struggles to comprehend why she joined when she sees the reality of them compared to them when they were on stage. And that, in a way, could be a meta-contextual look at the kind of audience that goes into a show like this, expecting the same that Azusa has. That they'd actually begin to take things more seriously, and even think about how they could perform better, and instead get met with them sitting around eating sweets and drinking tea and engaging what had become routine for the genre. And Azusa is being used to try and maybe give some drive to the group. Or maybe it's because Azusa is the new straight woman of the dynamic because Mio has essentially succumbed to the antics of those around her. Honestly, it's probably the latter if we're being honest here. This was 2009. They wouldn't start getting meta with this genre until Love is War. That being said, the group do pull it together and show that Azusa that they have in fact been practicing, giving a good showing for her that gives her the motivation to stick around with the club. And our new lineup is here with Azusa on backup guitar. The quintet known as After School Tea Time has been formed. From here, the series makes an effort to take things more seriously with Azusa involved, including a second training camp episode in which, while they do goof off again, it does show a good dynamic that Yui is the one that ends up practicing the most out of everyone involved in the entire time. And this actually works perfectly as well as an example of Yui's character growth throughout the entire first season, because, I'm about to blow your mind here, Yui Hirasawa is the main character of K-on! In its first season, at least. Much like how I made the comparison of Anthe being the protagonist of Revolutionary Girl Utena, I firmly believe that, at least in its first season, the primary focus revolves squarely around Yui's journey from being a possible NEET with no aspirations or goals or even having more than one friend, into someone who could arguably be on the road to fighting something for herself with a group of friends who support her. It's clear from the word "gur" that this is the vibe we get as, while it's played up to the typical tropes of late to the first day of classes, toasted mouth, etc., that you'd expect of the genre, To be honest, unlike her counterparts in similar positions such as Osaka and Yuno, Yui is kinda hopeless in most regards. To the point that this is played up for laughs for comedy for obvious purposes, but ultimately in universe is seen as a bit worrisome by the rest of the club, who think Ui taking care of the house as the younger sister is a bit too much for her to be doing. But just to not spoil anything for you when you watch the series, the payoff for this is one of the best moments in the entire series. But with that in mind, Yui's journey throughout this first season is even bookended by the ending arc of the first season, which focuses on the group preparing for another concert performance and Yui getting sick beforehand. Which admittedly also gives us this scene.
Wow, you sure have thick eyebrows, Mugi-chan. Yes, but they're actually takuan pickles.
During all of this, however, there's major concern on if Yui will be well enough to attend the day of the performance, to the point she shows up still sick a day beforehand, and arguably almost makes things worse for herself. She does manage to push through and make it in time for the performance by the skin of her teeth. This, in essence, alongside a near shot-for-shot recreation of the opening scene to the series, shows the level of growth that Yui has gone through since joining the Light Music Club, and how, thanks to all 4 of her bandmates, she's managed to make a better life for herself as a result. I can only think of one other person in a similar position whose journey matches this. Koyuki Tanaka from Beck Mongolian Chop Squad. See, in the story of Beck, Koyuki is in a very similar position to how Yui was at the beginning of his series. A directionless high schooler with not much really going for him and barely having any friends. But it is introduced to Ryusuke and his fellow would-be bandmates, alongside his sister Maho as well, does he find a calling in regards to guitar playing, slowly but surely building up confidence the more he practices over the course of the series' run. Minus a few setbacks caused by the interpersonal drama that comes with the territory of Beck being more serious. And to put it in comparison to the 12-episode run of K-On!, by the middle point of the anime run for Beck, it could be argued Koyuki has found his confidence and a group that is willing to back him up when needed and help him become known for his skills, causing the formation of Beck's main lineup to be completed. All capped off by Koyuki absolutely killing it alongside his high school band group, as well as proving to Ryusuke why he's a valuable asset to his own band as a result, and causing the second half of Beck to be the big popular rise for Koyuki and Beck by extension. But I'm getting a bit too ahead of myself. In that comparison, Koyuki and Yui are both very similar in that vein, but they also fit in the sense of what could be unconventional main characters, being ones that would essentially honestly seem way too relatable for any audience watching who's in a similar boat as them in real life. As, while one may argue these kinds of protagonists are very much a rare breed, they're not exactly the kind that you see often in anime today because of the fact that, well, anime is usually meant to be an escape from more realistic character portrayals. I say that very much with big quotations on the part of Yui, mind you, but I'd argue that characters like Yui and Koyuki make the series feel more human at its core, and make it seem like, yes, this could very well be something anyone watching at home could have been through in their own lives, and maybe can relate to, and their unconventional nature is only because of the escapism value in mediums like anime. And when you get to the finales, or moments like Koyuki's big damn music moment, or the triumphant moment where Yui joins her bandmates on stage triumphantly after making it just in time for her performance, you realize how important characters like them are because of their more relatable elements, and why shows like K-On! And Beck work so well because of it. And having gone a bit ahead of myself with that comment, the ending of Season 1 of K-On! Very much is one of those moments that very much has it all come together, and the concert of which they all come together and play an extended jam session version of Wafa Time is amazing. If your heart doesn't grow a few sizes watching that scene, I don't know what to tell you. And Yui's excited little reaction to it at the end of "I love light music" really brings it on home in a way. If this series ended at 12 episodes of that, I wouldn't even be mad that this was it because of how amazingly it brought it all together at the end. But it wasn't. In fact, there was an extra episode the week following on this one, and an OVA some months down the line. Both of which add to the series in such a way that you knew for a fact that they were going to be coming back to this at some point. And it was very much a big success for KyoAni. Like, I didn't even go through every single aspect of this series in grueling detail, and I'd argue if I didn't sell you on the idea of K-On's first season with that alone, I'd tell you to watch it for yourself if you haven't already, because my description alone cannot tell you how much of an amazingly dumb and amazingly sweet series this is in its first season alone. And it's no surprise that this was such a success because of it, in my personal opinion. Granted, it's 15 years in retrospect, but it's still very much a big case to say that people knew how big this series was based upon how much love and support came for it in the time of which it aired. Another big thing that added to that was how successful it was outside of the anime's airing itself, and how successful it was in being marketable it became as a result of said success. Now, it needs to be said before we go any further on this that the kind of success that K-On! Would have had was fucking insane, to say the least. It was the kind of success that realistically had not been seen to such a degree in potentially decades in the anime scene. And while we have certainly seen series copy and surpass the level of success that this franchise has had in its prime, make no mistake, this was the series that set the benchmark for a good few years on how to be a successful anime, not just in its popularity, but in its sales as well for merchandising. For example, I mentioned before about how the maxi single for Fwa Time ended up charting on the Oricon music charts. Well, that wouldn't be the only time this happened, as a compilation CD of songs from the first season would end up debuting at number 1 on the Oricon charts when it was released. This was big at the time, because back in 2009, this was practically unheard of that an album which was credited to a band from an anime, essentially a character CD, had top said charts, period. Which, if that isn't a mark of K-on's quality at the time, I have no idea what is. Oh, I know what would. The fact that the very next month, 3 image CDs would be released on the same day, and they would all chart in the top 10 simultaneously, which beat out the all-time record at the time done by Macross Frontier a year prior with its 2 at the same time. Yeah, I think K-on's music was popular. But that wouldn't even just happen with the first series. We haven't even talked about season 2 yet, but I don't need to tell you that the success basically was doubled to such a degree that by the end of the series run itself, it would have 20 consecutive top 10 spots for openings, endings, insert song maxi singles, compilation CDs, and image song singles. Hell, the audio mediums got so popular by the end that they managed to get people to buy a cassette tape of songs that were compiled in storyline by the end of the series. And it sold like fucking hotcakes!
But it wasn't even just the music CDs that were popular. Trust me, that is the biggest example, but we need to talk about its other mediums, like its physical DVD and Blu-ray releases, which, when the first volume of Season 1 came out, managed to beat the likes of Macross Frontier and The Dark Knight, with the only thing keeping it from number 1 being the rebuild of Ava 1.0. And when your only competition on the Blu-ray charts is goddamn rebuild of Ava, you've practically already won. Eventually, however, the series would debut at number 1 for every consecutive Blu-ray release for the series until its finalization with the movie's release in 2012, a feat which no series had done at that period of time. Hell, it was reported by February 2011, when the series had released its then final Blu-ray, that it was the first anime franchise to sell over 500,000 total Blu-ray sales, with the only one behind it being Bakemonogatari with a nearly 200,000 copy difference between the two. When I say that K-On! Was a popular success story, I mean that this series was a popular success story in every sense of the phrase. I mean, you want to know what else was a side of its popularity? The fact it had a rhythm game come out for the PSP. Yep, your eyes are not deceiving you. This is a rhythm game where you can play as your favorite girl from the series, match buttons to the rhythm of the songs from the anime and other CDs released during this time as well, unlock and dress them up in outfits from the show, and play the music in those outfits. All brought to you by the same company who gave us Project Diva starring Hatsune Miku.
Sega!
I keep on telling you that Sega loves us weebs, man. Between this, Utada, and Nadesco, I swear they have a monopoly going on appealing to anime nerds.
And, additional fun fact, if you have a totally legal copy of this game or its PS3 counterpart lying around the house, you could actually patch it so that you could play the game in English with the menus and whatnot all translated thanks to a dedicated team who made this possible for all us legal owners of the game to enjoy. But that isn't even the only game that got released during this time, as in 2012, around the time the movie was being released, the anime had an arcade game made with an updated setlist to include all Season 2's music, character CDs included, which featured a card system to unlock certain outfits, stages, and songs to keep you coming back again. Visually, it's similar to how the PS3 and PSP game was. In fact, I believe they used the similar assets to it. But fans of the anime ate it up to the point that they didn't mind, as it was fun, addictive, and most of all, in the spirit of K-On!, cute. And that's not getting into the other kinds of merch this series sold, like figurines, alarm clocks, bento sets. The series more or less was the It Prints Money meme with Nintendo and the DS, except you slap a poster of K-On! On top and put Yamada and Yoshina's heads on the top of the CEO of Nintendo's.
But while I could go on and show you literally every piece of K-On! Merch that came out in its peak, I don't have to. You can probably imagine it or look it up online and they would have probably made it for this series. The point here is that this one series essentially changed what it meant to be a success in terms of marketing and anime. And another thing that it managed to change with its release was how the general feel of certain animes were at this time. As well, a few series at the time of its heyday were in fact very cutesy series. It wasn't until after K-On!'s release that a lot of series began taking notes from this series, if you catch my drift.
A big example I feel would be the anime series Sora no Worto, or Sound of the Sky by A1 Pictures, whose art style very much felt inspired by KyoAni's visual style of the K-On!'s anime, while also being an early adopter example we'll point to later on how certain animes ended up bringing in attributes of the music genre more in over time. Another is how anime would begin to have examples of leaning in with more moe aesthetics or goofier slice-of-life antics along their more serious tones at times, with examples being seen as early as 2009's A Certain Scientific Railgun, which spun off from the Certain's Magical Index series, as a more slice-of-life focused spin-off that knew when to pump the brakes and give fans a more serious story at times. And before anybody makes a comment on it, yes, I'm aware that this was technically announced prior to K-On!'s release at the end of Index Season 1 in 2008, but in comparison to the manga in which it was being based upon, the anime version of Railgun does very much lean into that aspect more than its manga counterpart, something in which I may have to cover in an eventual Raildex franchise video because that is just the pattern now. And then you just have shows that kind of went all the way in with it, like Mitsutomoe, A-Channel, the second season of Strike Witches, Yuri Yuri, Milky Harms.
I could go on, but I feel like I'd have to find a stopping point somewhere, so let's just stop at 2012 to save us getting too sidetracked here. The point here being is that K-On! Being such a success isn't a surprise when you take into account how well loved it was at the time of its release, as well as how much people loved it after its time had ended. To the point where we'll get to talking about how far out its influence thanks to its success has led us today. But for now, let's just say that the rise of moeblob anime has K-On!'s success to thank for its existence, and the second season of this anime was arguably where it hit its peak in terms of how successful this one anime could be. So exactly 1 year after its debut in the spring season of 2009, K-On!, that's K-On! With 2 exclamation marks, or just K-On! Season 2, debuted on April 7th, 2010, detailing the final 2 volumes worth of content from Kakaflee's manga, while also bringing in some more original aspects into the mix. The series this time focuses on the now 3rd years Yui, Mir, Ritsu, and Mugi, and 2nd year Azusa, coming together for one final school year together to make music one last time, with a lot of laughs, tears, and applause throughout. And while K-On! Had very much been a major success story up until this point, it's worth being upfront and honest that it had a lot of pressure on this second season. Because yes, while it was definitely a hallmark of the times that with how financially and critically successful it was, it did exactly alleviate any pressure to have the sequel, not just because of the fact it was trying to be its own original thing as much as it was trying to be a faithful adaptation of the manga, but it was also because of how sequels can be, more often than not, fumble the ball, essentially, on the precipice of being an amazing series as a complete package. Lucky then, that season 2 of K-On! Is a perfect example in how to avoid the dreaded sophomore slump, and arguably make it even better than its first season. The biggest thing that is a cause of concern with a second season after such a wildfire success as of a first one is usually, how do you follow up something like that? Think Nas with Illmatic and then releasing it was written, or the first half of Game of Thrones to the back half of that exact same series. There's a sense of dread that comes with trying to follow up the success of something so big as your first body of work, that more often than not, it can cause your downfall. A sophomore slump is usually what's referred to in this regard, and more often than not, is a cause for concern when it comes to something as big and successful like K-On!'s first season was. Yet what if I told you that this series managed to overcome it, but also surpass its first season? Jumping ahead a little bit here, this season of the show was so much more successful compared to its first season, to the point where the merch boom somehow got bigger during all of this. But not only that, but the same year at the 15th Kobe Awards, this series would win the Best TV Series Award. That means that K-On! Season 2 is up there with the likes of Neon Genesis Evangelion, Revolutionary Girl Utena, Cowboy Bebop, Fullmetal Alchemist 2003, The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya Season 1, Polina Magica Magica, and Yuri Yuri. If that isn't a mark of quality of this show, I don't know what is. Well, I know what else would. The fact that it jumped from a 12 episode order run to a 24 episode run, effectively doubling it from the previous year's run of excluding any extra episodes or OVAs released after the fact. For the record, you don't really see that kind of thing happen either at the time or even now, as most second seasons of a show normally stick to the same episode order as the previous season did. To my knowledge, I haven't seen another example like it, but if you know of any like this, let me know below.
Hey everyone, it's once again time to talk with Future Chloe here, and it's occurred to me while I'm editing this video right now that I completely skipped talking about the music in Season 2, even though I was totally going to talk about it because I mentioned it in the script. So guess what? You now get some off-the-cuff commentary about the theme songs and the insert songs of Season 2 just before we get to the really sad parts of this script. Sorry, not sorry for the total whiplash you're about to get, but let's go, I guess. Alright, so let's start off by going with the theme songs first of all. So, Go-Go Maniac, I personally feel like it's the best theme song, and it's kind of a trend with Season 2 because they've either got a really great opening and kind of a mid-ending, or arguably the most mid-opening possible for the series, and the best ending of the series. And spoiler alert, Listen is not the best one. In fact, it's arguably, compared to the 3 that we've gotten so far, it's arguably my least favorite out of all of them. But Go-Go Maniac is arguably a great successor to Kagayake Girls in terms of the theme, in terms of the actual music in it, and I personally feel like it is genuinely the best opening in terms of, like, not visuals, because I'll get to that in a moment, but definitely music-wise, it is the best one out of all of them. That being said, Listen, on the other hand, it's fine. Look, I'm not going to be one of those people that's super negative about this one, but when you're going to compare it to Don't Say Lazy and No Thank You, which we'll get to in a little bit, it's arguably hard to really say that this one really stands out of all of them. The visuals are really nice though. I really like the visuals for Listen, in all honesty. But that's the only thing it's really got going for it. The music is kind of just whatever, I suppose. And there's not a lot I can really say about it. It's one of the only ones that I kind of don't really care for all that much out of the 3 openings in it. It's the one I really don't care for the most out of all the endings. That's just me personally. And oh boy, I feel like I'm gonna incite a riot in my comment section with this next bit.
But I really, really, really do not like Utaya Miracle, in all honesty. And I think it is arguably the weakest out of all the openings in the series musically. I mean, visually, it's great. Visually, it's arguably the best opening in the entire series. If you are basing this just off visuals alone, Utaya Miracle, like, absolutely decimates the other two openings. But if we're talking about the music, which is what we're here for, no, it's not really doing anything for me personally. Like, this might just be a me thing, and I really don't get what people see in Utaya Miracle, and I get it, Utaya Miracle fans, you are absolutely okay with saying that this is fine. But to me personally, I pretty much skip this every single time I watch K-On! Season 2. Sorry, not sorry. But on the other side of the coin, I could never, in my heart of hearts, ever skip No Thank You. No Thank You is arguably the best ending in the entire series. It clears all the others by a mile, and honestly, I had it as a ringtone when I was in high school because it was so fucking good. And the visuals, oh my god, the visuals of this fucking thing. It's arguably the best visual-wise out of all the endings, and that is saying a lot given the fact I gave such high praise to Listen just a moment ago. But if that is not a mark of quality for Season 2, I don't know what is. And I guess because we gotta talk about them, quick little speed round of all the insert songs that come about in this second season real quick, simply because, well, a lot of them are very spoilery, and I'm not gonna get into the spoilers behind a lot of them this time for many reasons regarding Season 2, but quick little round, let's go. Pure Heart. It's fine, it's okay. I really like the fact that Mio actually gets like a solo song this time around, given how Yui heavy the songs in this one get. But in all honesty, I kind of wish that Mio actually had like a bit more to what she has, and I kind of wish that the context behind why she's doing this was a little bit better. It's fine. Gohan wa Ozaku. I could totally forgot about this one whenever I'd think about the music in this series, and in all honesty, it's only probably because of the fact that it's probably the least memorable one out of all of them, to be honest. Like, if you put all of the songs from Season 2 back to back to back for me, I would probably not be able to tell you which one is Gohan, to be honest, and that's purely because it's just there. It's fine, but it gets overshadowed by You and I, which fucking makes me cry so goddamn much. You don't have any idea. God, if my tears could be distilled into a fucking power source, you could play this song on repeat on headphones for me, and you would be able to power the world for an entire century with the amount of tears this song gives me. With that being said, I think it's the best song of the entire season, if not the entire series in my personal opinion, and that one only gets matched by Tenshi ni Fuyata Yo, which arguably is worse, but I love You and I for reasons I can't explain because I'm trying to be very spoiler light in this video, but let's just say they both very much contain as much feels as they do, like, for musical stuff. Like, it's hard for me to explain without going into a lot of spoilers and, like, the meanings behind them. You'll know what I mean if you ever watch this series, but it's a close second to You and I, in my honest opinion, as the best one. Like, it's neck and neck between the two, but You and I... Oh yeah, and Kurinachi Rice was great. It's middle of the road, in all honesty, given everything in Season 2, but, if I had to place it anywhere, it would definitely be super in the middle, given the songs we get this season. Yeah, that's about it. That's all I can really say.
And it's well deserved for that double order, mind you, as the second season deals with the main four becoming seniors and the next 24 episodes pacing out their graduating year, which gives more time for a lot more hijinks and shenanigans to occur. And while some people may say that's a bit much for the kind of episode run, given that the first season felt like it had a perfect run order for it, I'd honestly have to disagree because the content in the season touches upon a lot of different storylines. Because while this may focus on how the main four are going through as seniors in their final year, it also shines a light on characters like Azusa, Ui, and newcomers to the fold in Jun and Shizuka, who are prospects to joining the music club potentially when the main four end up graduating.
However, that aspect of the main four's graduation being in the back of everyone's minds, viewers included in this, isn't lost on the creators of the series, in those writing the episodes, as it basically relies on their emotional investment for the series for what might be seen on the surface as second verse same as the first, but what happens in its back half is something of which I feel makes this season well worth it. As you can imagine, with the already mentioned graduation looming around the corner for the main four, and Asus's attempts to try and get more members in, it makes it clear from the get-go that the reality for the group is seeping in hard, and for better or for worse, they'll need to prepare themselves for it. That energy is there from episode 1, mind you, but the series hides it behind that usual demeanor of goofy antics and moeblob cuteness you'd come to expect from this series by now. But at a certain point in this series, it almost becomes impossible to hide. It's around episode 20 where this ends up becoming the point where it can no longer be hidden from either the audience or by the main quintet. It becomes impossible to hide and impossible to hold back the feelings of because of everything leading up to it, both in the previous 14 episodes in season 1 and the 19 that came before this one in question. In fact, like most of what I've said about season 2, I'm not going to tell you about this moment. While I would go into details about it, and why it gets me going emotionally literally every single time I watch this show, because it would be a disservice for me to tell you and show you this moment without the context of the 34 episodes leading up to this moment in question. So instead, I'll try my best to show you what I mean by comparing it to another similar scene from another series that aired around the same time. Kamen Rider Double. In episode 48 of the series, a similar moment happens within its closing moments in which saddens the protagonist to the point of tears, all while a somber instrumental version of 2 of the insert songs of this series plays in the background of this moment, and the one to follow it. This moment also caps off an important emotional journey between the 2 characters in question, and the song which plays is integral to that journey as it represents a microcosm of their entire relationship's development. And it hits so much harder given the fact that there's no joke or awesome moment to cap it off. Just a sad, melancholic moment to end what is essentially an important episode of its run. And, most fittingly, both episodes aired within the same week of each other as well in August 2010, with K-On! Episode 20 airing on the 17th, and Kamen Rider Double airing on the 22nd. Call it a coincidence if you'd like. I think great minds somehow think in a hive mind, and this is a perfect example of it at work. With that being said, however, they do still have 6 episodes left after this, so it's not all bittersweet for too long given the events at hand. But it does cast a bit of a shadow over the series as, for all of its fun and goofy antics to come, the realities of growing up to eventually come for our team at the end of it all. But before we get to that ending, let me deviate just a little bit to talk about an elephant in the room about season 2 of this show. Mainly about how the episode release order and release of certain OVAs made the timeline of this season an absolute mess to deal with. Okay, so something I feel which is a problem with early KyoAni works is the way that the airing order for some of their shows can be very confusing. As for this and Haruhi Seasons 1 and 2, the order that is found on home video releases and on streaming sites always seems to come back to an order that makes 0 sense. Take this for example. In the original broadcast of Season 1 in 2006, they had that weird Adventures of Mikuru Asahira movie that comes in with Sai of Haruhi as its first episode. Then they had the first 2 episodes of Melancholy, then Boredom, for some reason in between, then Part 3, then Remote Island Syndrome Part 1, then Mystery Symbol, then RIS Part 2, then Someday in the Rain for some reason, then Part 4 of Melancholy, then Day of Sagittarius, then Live Alive, then the final 2 parts of Melancholy. Do you see why this is maybe a very fucked way of watching Haruhi Season 1? Thankfully, they corrected this later on in 2009's rebroadcast, where the entirety of Melancholy opens the series, then Boredom, then Bamboo Leaf Rhapsody, then Mystery Side, then Remote Island Syndrome's 2-parter, then Endless 8, then Psy, then the Mikuru thing, then Live Alive, then Sagittarius, and Someday in the Rain, filling it all out. This order is mostly contained for the home video and streaming releases, which, albeit annoying if you're trying to follow the series chronologically between having to swap seasons continuously for it at times,
does make it a lot easier to follow compared to it when it was originally shown. K-On! Season 2, unfortunately, suffers this same issue, and doesn't have the luxury of the home video releases correcting the chronological order issues, however.
So Season 2 starts just fine with the first 13 episodes essentially working very well in sequential order. Then suddenly chronologically you have an OVA that was released to coincide with the movie's release around the middle of 2011 is the next thing to watch. Then after that you have episodes 14 through to 21, then episode 25 after the fact as that happens following episode 21's events. Then you have episode 22, then following up that with episode 26 immediately after that, then episode 23, then the movie, and then finally episode 24. And why is that the case? Because for some reason they packed in 2 episodes which are slotted in between the last 4 stretch of episodes after episode 24, which if you end up watching it all in airing order, you'll not only feel confused about the placement of it, but also feel a lot of emotional whiplash after the fact because of how episode 24 ends the story. And then you have the planned OVA and the movie which released the following year, and connect to each other as the planned OVA essentially has elements that tie into the movie being a thing, while also being placed way in the middle of the show altogether.
Essentially, the broadcast order is confusing, and it's better if you just watch the series chronologically, which unfortunately means for those watching the home video releases that you gotta swap between episode orders and the movie to get the ideal experience for this. Speaking of that movie, however, that got released a year after at the end of the series run in December 2011, with thunderously loud applause as the fans basically saw this as the last hurrah for the franchise, given the fact that, aside from this, no other news of a continuation had surfaced by this point. And without going too deep into the details of it, it makes for a nice detour when we get to watching it in chronological order of the series' main events, while also being a nice epilogue to the series if you watch it in release order.
In fact, I'd argue either way than that you end up choosing to watch it in this series. It makes for a perfect encapsulation of the series' best aspects, and I'd argue it's one of the better parts of the franchise as a whole. Even if it's just the gang goes abroad and has major cultural shock as tourists for an entire 110-minute showing. And as it turns out, a lot of people agreed with that sentiment, as the movie ended up not only topping the box office charts during its release and giving the franchise a few more Blu-ray sales toppers, but it also ended up giving K-On! One more record at the Kobe Awards. As at the 17th Kobe Awards in 2012, K-On! The movie would end up winning the Best Theatrical Award, an award won by Ghost in the Shell 96, Spirited Away, Paprika, The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya, and Madoka Magica Rebellion, making it obvious that it was as much a critical success as it was a sales success as well.
On top of that, however, it meant that for every year that it was eligible or nominated for an award, K-On! Would end up winning at least one award per year it was around for. Let it never be said that this series was not a critical darling for its antics. But without going into too much detail about it, given how much of a ride it ended up being getting to the end, it makes you wonder how it manages to end, doesn't it? Once again, this is not going to be disclosing any major details about the ending of the series because I value K-On!'s journey as being one you need to see for yourself to properly appreciate it, especially given how impactful its final 4-episode run can be. I will just say to satiate you all, the ending of the series lives up to the story weaved up until this point, and then some. As a culmination of the 40 episodes and movie run of the show, and especially being a culmination of the journey that all 4 girls have been on since the beginning, and arguably Asusa's own journey throughout season 2, it ends in such a way that you cannot help but smile through your own tears on.
No matter what part of the series you find yourself most drawn to by the end of it, the series manages to end off on such a high note of which, I'd argue, makes it one of the most heartfelt finales in not just any KyoAni production. Trust me, that is saying a lot given the company's repertoire. But I'd say this is actually one of the best and most heartfelt finales of any anime I've ever watched. Because if K-On!'s heart is felt from the moment you see Yui trample her way out the front door with toast in her mouth, it's felt as she's delivering one final song for reassurance that things will be okay. If its heart is felt the first time you see all 4 members of the group come together as one club, it's felt as they make a dash throughout the halls and leap into the air to finish off the series set to the first song they ever wrote together.
The heart of this series is felt in every stretch of the way, and just summarizing each moment of importance is far from enough. If I haven't urged you all enough with this, please watch this series for yourself, and you'll see why it's such a lovely ride from beginning to end, and why its ending has to be seen to be properly felt.
And while the end of the anime certainly left people fiending for more, it's not like they had to wait much longer for more K-On! Content to come out, at least in manga form. See, around about the time the anime was wrapping up, Kakaflea announced that they were going to be making a follow-up to the K-On! Manga, which had finished publishing in early 2010, with K-On! College and K-On! High School running side by side for 2011, as an epilogue of sorts to the story of which the anime just wrapped on.
And, in all honesty, it's a decent follow-up for both sides, which did build upon what the final half of the series had been building towards, the split between HTT and Azusa's new clubmates and their ever-changing stories as a result. The only downside being the run for both of these wasn't for long, and only went for one full Tankobon volume before the series once again went dormant in its manga format. And while there were reports following the release of these volumes in 2012 that Yoshida and Yamada would return to do a third season of K-On! Given the success of the movie in 2011, rumors of the matter were later shut down entirely, and instead the duo worked on their next project together alongside the same team they worked on K-On! With in Tamako Market, which aired in 2013. Yamada, however, would also go on to direct the adaptation of Sound Euphonium for KyoAni in 2015 as well, with the two series in my humble opinion being the closest we'll ever get to the successor series to K-On! For both its goofy moe antics for Tamako Market and its music-based seriousness in Euphonium. So if you end up loving K-On! Or love it already, I'd highly recommend either of these series as your next point of call. Finally as well, Yamada would also work in between two Sound Euphonium movies as a director for A Silent Voice. For those who love this movie or K-On!, I highly recommend either, as Yamada's touches can be felt expertly in both of these works.
So I guess the big thing you're probably asking yourselves by this point is, why spend all of this time talking about such a simple series like K-On!? Well, the answer is a bit twofold, so bear with me here a moment. See, the anime first premiered back in 2009, meaning that, as of this video coming out, K-On! Has now been around for 15 years. Which is a lot of time when you think about it, as it's been out for well over half my life now. And in the time since its debut and climax both on television and in theaters, this series has somehow managed to affect not just the history of its production studio KyoAni, but arguably the anime industry as a whole in the years to follow.
I mentioned before about how music-based anime were a thing prior to K-On!'s debut in 2009, but it needs to be said that the genre itself and its implementation of music as a part of the series' identity became more prominent after K-On!'s success is something that needs to be looked at seriously. As even the following year, you have examples like Angel Beats with Girls Dead Monster being a prominent member of the cast, and having two insert songs which come at pivotal moments in the show, and the aforementioned Sora no Oto, whose plot literally involves the main protagonist getting involved thanks to a bugle player, and that is part of her motivation towards the main event of the series. And in 2011, following Season 2's wildfire success, you have anime such as Idolmaster starting off the trend of idol anime becoming more prominent, which would in turn lead to the likes of Ushino Prince Sama, Love Live, and Bang Dream all happening in the years to follow. Or what about anime such as Senki's Sashou Symphogear, which literally has the main characters singing their own battle themes as they fight one another each episode, and their suits working primarily due to their singing. Or even the likes of Your Lie in April, Carol and Tuesday, and other animes of that nature in the past decade which have had their plots practically revolve around music being the primary focus of their plots. And that's not even getting into series like Bocchi the Rock, which could essentially be seen as this generation's version of K-On! Given the group dynamics in that show, as well as Bocchi just being Yui but replacing the moe in her head with pure, unbridled anxiety which tears a hole in the fabric of the universe. Which kinda makes sense because K-On! Was its generation's back, and so the cyclical nature of anime generations having that one particular music anime to focus on per generation continues on and on. I can only imagine what next generation's popular music anime will bring. And that's not even touching on how K-On! Practically revived and breathed new life into the growingly stale nature of slice of life, which by 2009 had become a kind of a paint by numbers in a sense, with K-On!'s heart essentially feeling like the most unique take on it since Azumanga in 2002. And it feels like ever since that it's gotten better and better, while also leaning in hard to the aspects in which K-On! Got popular through its very moe aesthetic and its incredibly goofy moments at times, which you can even see today in some of KyoAni's recent works. Hell, speaking of KyoAni, immediately following K-On!, they did just lean on it and Haruhi forever. They went back and tried their hand adapting Nichijou in 2011, and showing that while they had found a similar style to work with visually, they could still pull out something striking with their works like they did with Lucky Star previously. And then the next year in 2012, they showed us how they could handle two different genres by working on Hyoka and Shutakoi back to back, showing that they weren't just resting on their laurels. I already mentioned Tamako Market, which came out the following year, but that same year in 2013 was also the year Free Iwatobi Swim Club debuted. And we all know how that went down. And then you have shows like Beyond the Boundary, Amagi Brilliant Park, Sound Euphonium, Kobayashi-san's Dragon Maid, Violet Evergarden. I could keep going at this point, but the point here is that KyoAni only went from strength to bloody strength after K-On!'s success. And I feel that while without K-On! They still would be successful, it was the series that KyoAni needed. But it's not the only reason why I decided to make this video. Because when doing research for my In Transition video that I did previously, I found that K-On! Shuffle, a spin-off manga for the series, began releasing in 2018, and started being published in the West by Yen Press 2 years ago. And that kind of surprised me that K-On! Is still here after all this time. The fact that a series like this could still be around after 15 years, with it still being one of KyoAni's more popular projects, even with their more recent ones garnering a lot of praise, means a lot for people like me that sung its praises when it was new, and even now when it's considered older anime compared to today's standards. But honestly, if K-On! Is considered a legacy anime now, I feel its legacy as one of the best animes of the 2010s needs to be remembered fondly. Because it's one of the most joyous, sweet, and heart-filled animes I've come across in my years of watching it. To the point that I often revisit it because of how important it is to me now. And its influence across the board needs to be remembered. Because while anime certainly could have argued to have continued the same way over time without K-On!'s influence, I feel like without it, we wouldn't have so much of the anime of the same nature that we have today, and certainly not a lot from Kyoto Animation. That's why I love K-On!, and I feel you should too. This video was made possible through supporter patrons like the ones you're seeing on screen right now. If you like videos like this one and others on this channel, please consider supporting them via the Patreon link and subscribing to the channel. Thank you for the time, and catch you later.